Welcome to the Topic of the Month with Kim Wardlow, an AINC original podcast. It's not easy being blind or going through vision loss, but we'll help you navigate these waters. Press on. Push forward. You've got this.
Well, hello, this is Kim Wardlow, your host for Audio Information Network's Topic of the Month podcast. We are back this week with Bill Lundgren once again. So welcome back, Bill.
Glad to be back.
Thanks. Well, and this week we are talking about addiction. I guess really a place to start, Bill, is how do you identify if you have an addiction? I think of drinking, for example. Well, I'm just a social drinker. I don't have an addiction. And that could be true in other realms as well, other types of addictions. How does one know if you actually have an issue that you should be dealing with and seeking some help?
Well, there's some basic questions that therapists will ask about, and which gives us a clue as to how much to explore with someone who's not coming in saying, I need to deal with my drinking or whatever. But one of the questions has to do, if you've been concerned about your drinking, for example, is anyone in your, have expressed their concern to you that they have about your drinking? And particularly with drinking, do you drink first thing in the morning? Do you worry about control? If you're worried about controlling your drinking, or you're periodically say, I drink too much, so I'll just cut it out for a while, and then you start, you abstain for a while, and then you go back to it, and you find yourself going back and very rapidly coming back to where you were before. These are all signs that something is wrong, that you're out of control. Sometimes it's the family will confront and say, you drink too much, or your friends will say, or, you drink all your friends under the table. Those are all clues that something is awry. A blackout is a big one. In other words, a blackout is a time when, as far as everyone around you knows, you're operating normally. But when you go back over that period of time, there's it would be like a recording that we're doing right now. If there's a whole period of time where you, Kim, and I are talking, and then when we look back, it's all blank and none of it was picked up. That's a blackout for someone who's is in trouble with their drinking. The normal social drinking for women is 1 drink. For men, it's 2 drinks. And it has to do with body weight and so forth. And when you're consistently going beyond that, then there's a possibility there is a problem and ought to be looked at. If you're finding that you say things and you get into trouble when you're under the influence, if you're driving under the influence, one of the problems with alcohol, and I'm focusing on alcohol for a couple of reasons. One is people with disabilities have 3 times higher addiction rate than the average population. So we know this is a concern anytime we deal with any kind of disability. Now, it gets a little skewed because some of the people become disabled as a result of an accident while they were under the influence. So I look at those figures with a little bit of jaundiced eye, but the reality is that disability and trouble with substance abuse is something that has to really be paid attention to. The other factor involved is that family members may hesitate to even talk to you about your drinking or your drug use. And they might even say, well, if I were blind, I would drink too.
So instead of confronting you, they may actually be enabling you.
That's right. Or sometimes enabling, and this is an important word. Uh, let me digress for a minute with the enabler. At times when I've been single, I've been very nervous about going out and dating because if I go into a room and there's someone who's an enabler, a caretaker, they're going to go for me like a magnet because they want to take care of me, and I don't want anybody to
Mm-hmm.
take care of me. I want somebody who will be a partner or at least respect and let me tell them what I need. The enabler who will forgive anything that the alcoholic or the drug addict will do because, oh, he or she is blind and I would do the same thing, or I don't want them to feel bad, so I'm not going to talk about it. That's when they are enhancing and encouraging the problem rather than doing something about it. And it's amazing when you get sober, then, and people say this over and over again, I feel so much better about everything about me, including my blindness, once I stopped drinking,
Mm.
rather than feeling bad because they're trying to cover it up with alcohol or drugs or whatever. The other piece of it, of course, is because if we have any kind of disability, then there's going to be a tendency to give some pills, and the pills uh, require more pills, and you get off on a cycle that's out of control. And that's why we have to be very careful about the use of medication, the use of alcohol. But we can also be addicted to work. We can be addicted to a lot of other things with the same kind of mindset that those things help us feel normal. When we're drinking to feel normal, if we're working 60, 70 hour a day, 80 hour a week to feel normal and feel like you're accomplishing something, something's out of whack.
And what would you say to a person if it's a friend or family member and they say to you, "Well, my my blindness is the reason I get drunk, or is the reason I use pills, or is the reason I do whatever behavior, addictive behavior that they're doing, that's the reason and that's the escape, and you don't know what I'm going through. You're not having to deal with this." How do you respond and try to help the person or encourage them to get professional help?
Well, my instant response in hearing what you're saying is would not be repeatable on the radio, uh, basically because it's untrue. In fact, it's creating more problems rather than being able to address them. When you're drinking, you're hiding from how you feel about a disability. And instead of understanding it, finding other ways to work around the disability to build the kind of life that you want to lead, you're giving up.
Mhm.
And so say, look, your drinking is out of control. And therefore, you need to get it under control. And what's helpful when somebody confronts is if they have a place or someone in mind that that the person can go to and talk to them about it. That, I just see this is what's happening and being very specific. This is what an intervention is all about. Sometimes you have a counselor that helps the family do an intervention that is to be very specific about what they see rather than say, you drink too much, which is a generality. Say, on Thursday night, you were at this party, you did this, this, and this very specifically, and that's not normal behavior. And I can't be around you when you're doing that. There has to be a little, either I can be around you when you're sober, but I can't be around you when you're drinking. That starts to get into the person's mind. Oh, maybe it's out of line, and they get very defensive. But when you say, well, I found out about this program, and would you be willing to talk to somebody there? And they might, yeah, that kind of thing. But if you get them to go and talk with a professional addiction counselor, and sit down and let the counselor do the work, then you've made the best first step for the person that's in trouble.
Mm-hmm. And then would that counselor then be able to help the person identify what some of the stressors are, some of those triggers are, so they could truly address the problem rather than just masking over it?
Right, right. And the issue, I have to do a lot of work with triggers. What will trigger a relapse? See, a lot depends. Again, we've talked about uh, what type of counselor to go to. Well, you also have to think about, or the counselor can think about, what kind of program the person may need to go to depending on the severity of the addiction. And there's several levels here. In Denver, we have you could do outpatient. That is once a week. But my preference often is to do have somebody do an IOP, or an intensive outpatient program, where you go 3 times a week for a certain number of weeks in the evening, so it doesn't affect your work situation, and you get what you would get in terms of education in your addiction, group, individual therapy, that you would get if you were inpatient. Now, there's situations where somebody really needs to be inpatient simply because they need to be out of the drinking environment that they may be living in, and that's valid too. That could be 14 days. There's some programs that are 30 days. Inpatient, where you get all the intensive counseling and really work on sobriety. And then after any of these programs, it may be best to do a halfway house, where you have be around sober people for a while and be gradually incorporated into the community. So those programs are all fortunately available here. And there are even some programs that are working IOP virtually. So in other words, you just go to your computer and do what you would do in an IOP in person. So there are lots of options there if you're willing to do it. And it also gives the counselor will be monitoring how you're doing in order to help you and to find ways to be successful in sobriety, which may mean avoiding certain situations, figuring out what your triggers are, and also any underlying issue. One of the diagnoses we have, in kind of a slang term, is a dual diagnosis, where someone may be, for example, an alcoholic, but they might have an underlying depression, and then we have to deal with both rather than just one. But that's where the specialist in addiction is able to make that distinction and help the person identify what's going to work best.
Well, and it sounds like in some cases, a person really may need to make some greater life changes, not only seeking help in no longer drinking or no longer taking other substances, but if they've been impacted by friends or, their living situation, going back into that group of people might not be healthy. They really may have to make some other changes to their lives to continue to be successful.
Yeah. And that's where a 12-step program like AA is very important to help people continue that aftercare. Sometimes people get sober just being in AA and having a sponsor and living the program. And and sometimes a spouse may break up because the interaction between the partners may be toxic. And in fact, the enabler, this is one of the interesting things about enablers, the sober person may in fact need to have the person dependent on him or her.
Oh.
And in that way may unknowingly sabotage the person's sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've had situations where I've worked with a couple, and the husband gets sober and doing very well in sobriety. She divorces him, and I find out later she marries another alcoholic because she can't handle living with somebody who's sober. And those kinds of dynamics we have to look at. It's unfortunate, but that's why we talk about alcoholism, for example, as a family disease. And that's true with drug addiction. The whole family gets caught up in it.
Mm-hmm. Are there aspects of addiction or risks that a person who is blind are more susceptible to, more prone to than those who are sighted?
Well, one of the things about alcohol is that we tend to forget our limitations. And, if you're blind, if you think about the effect about, I'm focusing on alcohol because that's the major issue, even though we talk about drugs all the time. But if you think about the frontal lobe on the human head, that is the newest part of the brain, which has our ability to reason right or wrong and to understand consequences. It is the newest in terms of development, and it's also the newest in terms of human development. That came later. We begin to understand how things will work or won't work. And that's one of the reasons that teenagers and young adults get into trouble because their frontal lobe is less developed. And what we say as a rule of thumb is the brain is not fully developed till the person is around 26. So in that period of time when we expect more of people, they just don't have the ability to understand the consequences of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Well, the alcohol affects the frontal lobe first because it's the newest, most sensitive. And so you may think you can drive, but you can't. But right. You see that the frontal lobe being anesthetized is not able to tell you, you're crazy to get into a car. And that's where we run into DUIs. Mm-hmm. And you see, one of the things that also has to be considered that it takes quite a while before what people in the program refer to as getting your brain to recover, maybe a year. And if you get into an AA program or a treatment program, it may take a year before your ability to really make good judgments come back. And so it's a very gradual program. It's a very, your brain has to recover. And the same for pills. That's why we have to worry about relapse and look at the triggers, as you mentioned. What is going to trigger me to return? I've even had to, particularly early in sobriety, where somebody says, I drive by my favorite liquor store. So I say, okay, well, you'll just have to change your route to go home or wherever you're going, because the brain is always operating on the premise, I know what works for me, what makes me feel better. And so therefore, I'll go for, I'll remember what to do when I'm in that people, places, and things. Someone who's blind is still a matter of people, places, and things. And the danger, of course, is that we may forget that we don't have the senses or even being able to use the other senses that we normally would if we were sober. And then we get into trouble. And that's where the difference is. We as blind people learn to develop the other senses of touch, of hearing, to make some decisions. If that gets impaired, we're in trouble. Mm-hmm. And the enabling part is also the biggie. I keep coming back to that because, we can feel sorry for ourselves because we're blind. And then as long as we're drinking, we're not doing anything about feeling sorry for ourselves or making a life for ourselves. We give up. We feel hopeless and we get isolated. And if you're isolated, you're going to use substances that will numb our senses so we don't feel so isolated.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's important that you noted that a person choosing to address their addiction and start this process, that it's not a quick process,
Right.
that they'll probably need to give themselves some grace as they go through and process and give themselves some time. And then anyone around them, if anyone listening is on the opposite side and they're trying to be supportive of somebody who is working on overcoming their addictions, that it does take some time, and there's the mental healing, but also that physical healing, and healing in the brain to be able to actually recover.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've been looking at, well, if you listen to some of the statistics, drinking really increased during the pandemic. And that just figures, you're isolated, you're at home, you want to deal with your feelings, the drinking. And then, of course, what's going to happen, it'd be interesting to see as we ever get out of the pandemic, what happens in terms of treatment programs, how many will go into treatment. Seniors become more isolated, and a senior who's losing his or her sight feels even more isolated, and therefore, guess what's going to solve the problem in their minds? And so we have this kind of aiding us to deal with the loss. People drink to deal with their loss, and guess if you're losing your sight, then that's a loss, and you have to deal with the grief. You have to deal with that. But you don't have to if you're drinking it away.
Right. And it may seem easier to drink than try to learn how to use public transportation or use a cane,
right,
all those things. If you're having, in later years, having to learn many new things all at once.
And your friends are dying off, so they're not there to help. So we just spend more and more time at home because it feels safer. It feels like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I just here safe, and so I'll drink, and that'll take care of the problem. And sometimes it takes an injury, a fall, and to help the senior to wake up and say, hey, this drinking is really hurting me.
Right. And like you said, an outside person, a friend or family member, or
even as a home care person who comes in to help, to recognize, and we don't train them, but they, it's helpful if they recognize, bottles in the trash can, for an 89-year-old lady, and you see, a couple gallon bottles of booze, that should raise some concern.
Right.
But you'd be surprised at how many people don't. And, I know in personally, my grandmother, as she got older, and I'm an addiction professional, but my family didn't tell me my grandmother how much she was drinking. And she was always sober when I was there, of course. But they hid it. And that's the kind of thing that families do, thinking, well, she's too old. It's not going to be worth her trying to get help. And so she was losing that possibility for her to have a different kind of life.
Right. And maybe even some stigma associated
again
with that.
Yep. We come back to the stigma. Nobody wants to talk about the alcoholic in the family.
Right.
Or if you can't control your alcohol, there's something wrong with you. Well, it's just true. You're an alcoholic. But, for people, there's the stigma that I should be able to hold my liquor. Or there's proud that they can drink everybody else under the table and not see anything amiss when they can do that.
Well, this has been wonderful information once again, Bill. And I think just to encourage people who may be dealing with an addiction, that there is hope. There are places to go and folks that can help you through that journey to overcome the addiction. So thank you so much for all the information you provided to us today.
My pleasure.
If you have questions for us, you can reach out to us at aincolorado.org/podcast-guest. If you missed our episode last week, you can find that on our website. Last week just gave more of an overview about mental health and being able to find a counselor on our website, through Spotify, through Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. You can go back and listen to last week's as well. And also, I just want to remind you to look forward in a few weeks to the new podcast called Blind Sight that Bill will be hosting, and it will be able to delve much deeper into topics of mental health and look at much more than we are able to here just in this month covering this topic. So thank you so much, Bill, for joining us again. And we'll look forward to abuse and trauma. So definitely an important topic. And I'm sure you'll have many more insights for us.